Doolittle Raid, April 18, 1942. During World War II, U.S. Army Air Force's bombing raid on Tokyo and other Japanese cities. Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle led 16 B-25 bombers from the U.S. Navy aircraft carrier Hornet in a spectacular surprise attack that caused little damage but boosted Allied morale. The raid prompted the Japanese to retain 4 Army fighter groups in Japan during 1942 and 1943 when they were badly needed in the South Pacific. The attack also compelled the Japanese to push beyond their originally planned defensive perimeter, thereby increasing the vulnerability of their supply lines. At 3:10 a.m. on April 18th, American radar operators on the Enterprise detected a Japanese picket boat far outside the expected patrol area. The course of the task force was changed as each new Japanese vessel appeared on the radar screen. Finally, at about 7:38 a.m., lookouts on the Hornet spotted a Japanese patrol craft just 20,000 yards from the carrier. Although the USS Nashville quickly sank the ship, the Hornet radio room intercepted an outgoing message alerting the Japanese military to the presence of the Americans. While Doolittle had hoped to launch aircraft at a distance of 400 to 600 miles from the target, Halsey was unwilling to risk his valuable carriers by pushing deeper into the Japanese defensive perimeter. Halsey dispatched an order to the Hornet. "Launch planes. To Colonel Doolittle and gallant command, good luck and God bless you." At the same time, Halsey launched his own aircraft to engage the Japanese surface vessels in the area. At this point, the Hornet was more than 820 miles from Tokyo. Final instructions were given to the flight crews. Non-military targets were to be avoided at all costs, especially the Imperial Palace complex in central Tokyo. It would be almost entirely razed in an American firebombing attack in May 1945. If it proved impossible to make it to the Chinese coast, pilots were ordered not to divert to the Soviet Union, but to proceed as far west as possible, ditch their planes at sea, and make their way to shore in rubber boats. This would prove unnecessary for most of the aircraft, as they were aided by a 25-mile-per-hour, 40-kilometers-per-hour tailwind throughout the last 1,200 miles, 1,900 kilometers of their journey. After this final briefing, the crews boarded their B-25s, and Doolittle's plane was the first to lift off from the deck of the Hornet at 8:20 a.m. Despite heavy seas, the remaining B-25s took off without mishap, and within an hour, all of the raiders were airborne. The approach to the target was uneventful. About an hour into the flight, the raiders spotted a vessel that they took to be a camouflaged light cruiser, and an hour later, they crossed paths with a multi-engine land-based plane. From that point, they tried to avoid contact with various civilian and military craft that appeared on the water. Landfall was made north of Cape Inubo, a short distance from the mission's intended course. With the other flights proceeding according to their instructions, Doolittle's group approached Tokyo from the north. The raiders flew as low as the terrain would permit, and spotted several small biplanes, evidently trainers, in the air above them. Roughly 10 miles, 16 kilometers north of Tokyo, 9 Japanese fighters, in 3 flights of 3 planes, were spotted, but they did not move to engage the B-25s. As they neared their targets, the raiders climbed to a bombing altitude of 1,200 feet, 366 meters. They released their bombs, dipped back to treetop level, and flew west over the outskirts of the city. An estimated 14 tons of bombs were dropped on the Japanese mainland during the raid, and air crews claimed hits on virtually all of the assigned primary targets. Several of the planes reported seeing large fires as a result of incendiary bombs, while high-explosive ordnance did visible damage to factories, ammunition dumps, naval facilities, and military barracks. After the mission, crews stated that anti-aircraft fire was intense but inaccurate. While the Japanese gunners judged altitude well, the bursts were to the right or left of the planes, and the raiders did not lose any aircraft or personnel to flak. After leaving Tokyo, most of the raiders turned south and headed out to sea, bound for the China coast. Although skies had been clear over Japan, Bad weather set in over the East China Sea. The pilots attempted to climb to get over the storm, and by the time the aircraft reached the Chinese coast, they were at an altitude of 6,000 feet, about 1.8 kilometers. At that point, visibility was almost zero, and the raiders were flying entirely on instruments. Doolittle, whose plane had retained its command radio, attempted to reach Chuchao, but received no response. With his fuel almost gone, he ordered his crew to bail out. After setting the aircraft's automatic pilot, Doolittle followed, but not before glancing at the clock on the instrument panel. It was 9:20 p.m., exactly 13 hours since he had taken off from the Hornet. Everyone in Doolittle's plane landed safely in friendly territory, and they quickly made contact with local Chinese authorities. Doolittle asked General He Yangling, director of the branch government in western Zhejiang province, to keep a lookout along the coast for planes that might have gone down or boats that had reached the shore. Doolittle's crew was initially taken to Chuchao, and after a few days, eventually reached Chongqing. By the early morning of April 20th, 4 additional planes and crews had been located, and Doolittle wired Arnold from the embassy in Chongqing. Tokyo successfully bombed. Due to bad weather on China coast, believe all airplanes wrecked. 5 crews found safe in China so far. Among the crews who reached China, there were 3 fatalities from accidents during bailouts or crash landings. Corp Leland Factor, Sergeant William Dieter, and Corp Donald Fitzmaurice. Only 3 of the 16 crews failed to reach Chongqing. York, who had led the 3rd flight of planes into Tokyo, was desperately short of fuel and was forced to land near Vladivostok. He and his crew were interned by the Soviets in various locations for more than a year, before they managed to escape into British and Soviet-occupied Iran. Their escape was, in fact, an elaborate NKVD operation that had been staged to repatriate the Americans while giving the Soviets plausible deniability with the Japanese, with whom they were still non-belligerent. 2 crews were captured by Japanese forces in China after bailing out, one near the coast and one near Lake Poyang. The Chinese attempted to purchase the freedom of the captured air crews, but they were unsuccessful. 4 of the raiders remained prisoners of the Japanese until the end of the war. 1, Lieutenant Robert J. Metter, died of dysentery in 1943. 3, Lieutenant Dean Hallmark, Lieutenant William Farrow, and Sergeant Harold Spatz were executed by the Japanese in October 1942. The bombing did comparatively little physical damage, but it had an enormous psychological effect in both the United States and Japan. Doolittle was promoted to Brigadier General and awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, and the Army Air Forces used the raid as an effective recruiting tool. Captain Ted W. Lawson, a pilot involved in the mission, would write 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, 1943, a best-selling account of the raid that would be adapted as a feature film starring Spencer Tracy in the role of Doolittle. While Japanese planners had not ruled out the possibility of a strike on the home islands, the reality of American bombers in Tokyo's skies forced them to accelerate the expansion of their defensive perimeter. This would culminate in the planned invasion of the Midway Islands in the Central Pacific. U.S. cryptanalysts had penetrated the Japanese JN-25 naval code, however, and Pacific Fleet Commander Admiral Chester Nimitz ordered his carriers to intercept the Japanese naval force. At the subsequent Battle of Midway, June 3 to 6, 1942, naval air power destroyed Japan's first-line carrier strength and reversed the tide of the war in the Pacific. Please like, share, and subscribe to Outlaw News Network. We need you, so we can continue to grow. Thank you for watching.